Bear Brothers, the Vireon Saga, a work of Warhammer 40,000 fan fiction by TIE Fighter 77, the history of Vireo and the Vireon Wars. Part 1. All that glitters. The colonization of Vireo. The feral forest world of Vireo has always held potential. It was known in some circles that the secluded planet was rich with resources. Rumors described a small populace of human inhabitants, barbaric and ripe for illumination. Yet, while records of these favorable qualities existed, the planet's remote location, inconvenient to imperial shipping lanes, long delayed its conquest. The soil of Vireo thus remained undented by imperial boots for millennia, following initial rediscovery. Ultimately, of course, the Imperium's inexorable shadow did stretch tall enough to cast itself across the Vireon sky once more, and a survey team, escorted by a token guard detachment, breached the stormy atmosphere to finally claim Vireo for the Imperium of Man. The surface that greeted them was congruous with ancient reports. It was easy enough to imagine how the planet got its name. From space, Vireo appears as a pearlescent orb of perfect emerald, alive with the milky swirls of an active weather system. But for the seas, the surface is near entirely green. The portion that forms dry land is almost universally covered by homogeneous coniferous forest, the exceptions being a few narrow latitudes of steppe and the Arctic polar regions. Very little of Vireo is absent vegetation. Millions of lakes, jagged coastlines, low mountain ranges, and nearly constant rain characterize the landscape. Cool planetary temperatures produce a predominantly maritime climate and do not allow for tropical regions, though the seasonal fluctuations are not extreme. The Vireon year is of relatively standard length, and beyond the rocky highlands, snow does not fall at most latitudes more than 1 or 2 months annually. Observed fauna was generally typical, with little outside of the known zoological catalogue, inviting speculation of ancient terraformation. One life form worthy of remark is the massive Vireon bear, many times more intelligent than ordinary bears and capable of growing to elephantine sizes. The rumored human inhabitation was not immediately apparent, though they soon made themselves known. The technology level of the natives had not progressed beyond that of late Iron Age, and though they had colonized several continents, the population was not overlarge. Whoever the Vireons had originally descended from, they had devolved into warring semi-independent tribes, or Tuatha, in the Vireon vernacular. The culture was derivative of the ancient Terran Celts, sharing much in language and pagan practice. However, though distrustful and belligerent, they posed no real threat to the well-armed Imperials, secure within highly fortified enclosures. And in such small numbers, the Vireons were no competition for the planet's abundant resources. In truth, the Imperium cared little for the natives or their backward ways. Conquest was unlikely to have ever been a priority, as evidenced by the newly organized and raw penal legion escorting the survey team, a nominal Imperial Guard unit, if ever there was one. No, the expedition's truer purpose dealt with exploiting resources and lining investor pockets more than expansion or glory. Indeed, it was decided that re-education and enlightenment could wait while more pressing issues were dealt with, for even wealth was not the full story. Those ordering the expedition were conscious of something special on or about Vireo, though now only conjecture can say what. Something about the planet was important or dangerous enough to arouse the attentions of the powerful. Perhaps it was its proximity to a minor warp storm, or some unique resource, or exotic psychic property that finally drew the Imperium to the Vireon system. Or it simply may have been a strategic staging location for some covert campaign or venture. Whatever was the whole truth, its knowledge was held only by a handful of expedition leaders who never divulged it. Within a few years, a thriving, if diminutive, imperial colony had blossomed at the heart of one of the meridional continents, precisely at the point of survey team disembarkation. The colony, a complex of administrative structures and modest civilian sprawl, radiated outward from a central guard compound. It became known as Jegan's Station, in honor of some sponsor, or perhaps one of the expedition leaders. For a decade or so, the colony grew as somewhat of a boomtown. Despite vigorous attempts to control immigration, the allure of easy wealth and paltry regulation drew the earnest and unsavory alike. Unsanctioned trade and travel were commonplace for a time, as planetary administration lacked the manpower to effectively discourage black market enterprises. Yet, we shall see that such dilemmas of prosperity flickered out quickly. That is the way of boomtowns. For their part, the native Vireans tolerated but did not welcome the interlopers. A handful of initial skirmishes demonstrated the futility of challenging the Imperials, who seemed not to seek conquest or tribute in any case, rarely venturing beyond their enclosure walls. However, tensions did increase when Jegan's Station began to boom, and further waves of Imperial settlers and fortune hunters reinforced the colony. These newcomers were much bolder, immediately expanding the frontier and establishing outsider settlements beyond the borders of the original colony. Such settlements were invariably and immediately attacked by the native Vireans. With these raids, the Vireans sought both to further test the assailability of the foreign encampments and to express their own territorial claims. They were very keen to demonstrate their considerable battle prowess, honed over untold centuries of tribal warfare to the Imperials, fearing that to do otherwise would show weakness and invite their own subjugation. Though the Virean peoples could not fathom space travel, nor glimpse the smallest fraction of Imperial might, they had experienced the superiority of the Outlander weapons, and were quite understandably unsettled by the growing foreign presence on their world. In spite of these conditions, over the next several generations, the ineffectiveness of warfare and the profits of active trade produced remarkable cooperation between the frontier settlers and the natives. But the imperial administrators and the guard units that supported them proved increasingly aloof and untrustworthy. Through general colony mismanagement and negligence, even governmental relations with colonial settlers grew strained. In time, outside enthusiasm for the planet waned. Funding for the mysterious venture, such as it was, dried up. While Vireo's vast resources remained virtually untapped, the system's inconvenience outlasted its novelty and thus its appeal. Fewer and fewer supply convoys found their way to Vireo, and interstellar traffic slowed to a bare trickle. It pleased the Imperium to maintain its presence on the planet, and so the stationed guard units were not relieved, but neither were they to be refreshed. The Virean colony was to be neither supported nor abandoned, and thus those who had come by choice or duty had to remain, and were left to their own devices. The penal genesis of the troops began to show. Guard discipline, never exemplary to begin with, deteriorated to some extent, and liberties were often taken with the civilians. Virean natives who had integrated and lived among the settlers especially suffered such abuses. Small-scale and half-hearted rebellions were quelled with some regularity. In time, administrative heads grew to regret their delay of proper imperial conquest of the planet, but it had behooved the clandestine nature of their operation to defer it. Now it seemed never to be. Reports of civil uprisings and personnel concerns fell on deaf ears. No reinforcements or replacements would be forthcoming. The Imperium had lost interest. Another century passed in this manner. The imperial citizens of Vireo clung to order and civilization by the barest of threads. Regions chiefly populated by descendants of outlaws and prospectors scorned imperial authority. Integration with the native Vireans became commonplace. At the outskirts of the colonial frontier, the emperor was all but forgotten, while pagan culture was adopted. The fate of Vireo appeared tragically sealed, ever to remain a remote backwater fringe world, passed over by the emperor's glory.